The Battle of Agincourt is remembered not because it was an inevitable triumph, but because it was an upset. Outnumbered English longbows were victorious over French knights only because the knights had to charge up a muddy hill through a dense forest. The English wore little armor and were able to catch the encumbered French in the middle of their retreat. A charge by Henry and his surviving cavalry pushed aside the beaten French and opened the road to the coast. Despite his victory, Henry did not follow through on his attack, but withdrew to England. The true winner of the battle was Burgundy, which was able to come to power in a vacuum emptied by both the English and the French.
Roger de Flor proved to be a match for Osman. He managed to defeat Turkish armies on several occasions and almost drove them out of Anatolia. Just as de Flor neared his greatest victory, he was betrayed. The jealous Byzantine nobles, fearing that de Flor would take the reconquered lands for himself, ordered his assassination. In retaliation, de Flor's Catalan company ravaged Byzantine Anatolia and Greece before returning home with the body of their esteemed commander. With de Flor finally gone, Osman could complete his conquests and consolidate his power. The other Turkish beys soon acknowledged his rule, and he founded his own empire that would bear his name, Osmanli Devleti, the Ottoman Empire. The White Huns were powerful, but too disorganized to cope with multiple invasions. When the Persians and their Turkic allies launched a two-pronged attack, the White Huns panicked. The mighty Persian beasts of war and swift, accurate Turkish horse archers crushed the disorientated enemy within 8 days. After the Persian victory at Bujará, the White Huns faded into history, and the Gökturks and Persians divided the conquered land among themselves. Under Khosrau, Persia once more became a worthy rival of the Byzantine Empire, while the Turks established themselves in the vacuum left by the White Huns. Richard's combined naval and land operations proved to be successful, and Cyprus was swiftly taken by the Crusaders. Isaac was thrown into the dungeons, and Richard crowned himself king of the island. Richard then sailed east to resume his crusade. Upon his arrival in the Holy Land, however, Richard discovered that he alone remained to lead the crusade. Barbarossa had drowned crossing an Anatolian river, and Philip Augustus had returned to France with an illness. Despite these setbacks, Richard proved more than capable of the task ahead, matching wits with the famed Saladin. Richard is remembered as a brave warrior, a skilled commander, and a righteous king, renowned for his patronage of poetry as well as his martial exploits. He remains the ideal of the romantic chivalric knight and an iconic figure in both England and France. After years of conflict, the war god's thirst for blood was satisfied. Balazs, having betrayed his father and brother and sacked the city he held dear, was plagued by guilt. Despite his victory, he relinquished his claim on Tikal and instead returned to Dos Pilas, where he spent the remainder of his days. Later, Tikal was rebuilt, and it finally overcame its rival Calakmul. However, it never truly recovered from the betrayal of one of its dearest sons, and the Mayan civilization steadily declined.
Harold the Saxon's housecarls looked certain to defend the crown for him as they fought the Vikings to a bloody stalemate at Stamford Bridge. Despite his losses, Harold marched his exhausted troops south to meet William the Conqueror near Hastings. William's archers and pikemen were no match for Harold the Saxon's veteran housecarls. Harold even broke the charge of William's knights. William himself went down in the fray, and as rumors of his death spread, the Normans turned to flee. William was not dead, however, and he rallied his troops by throwing aside his helmet so they could see his clean-shaven face and know he was alive. William and his armored knights rode down the housecarls, breaking the Saxon force, and continued their ride all the way to London. William was crowned king on Christmas Day. Because his reign eventually ushered England into a position of unprecedented world leadership, the year 1066 became established as the most famous day in English history.
The Magyar horsemen annihilated the Frankish army and utterly destroyed the Empire of Great Moravia. After centuries of wandering the steppes, they could finally settle down to create their own kingdom. Many, however, rejected the thought of exchanging their bows for plows. Not until Otto the Great, founder of the Holy Roman Empire, defeated them at the Battle of Lakefeld, did the Magyar raids finally come to an end. After this defeat, the Magyar nomads adopted European ways, converted to the Christian faith, and transformed into farmers. They founded the Kingdom of Hungary, whose army was famed for its combined elements of nomadic horsemen and heavy cavalry. For centuries, Hungary would stand firm as the frontier stronghold of Europe, resisting invaders from the east, invaders much like the first Magyar raiders who ventured into Europe. Thunder boomed as spears of lightning pierced the sky. Driven back from the walls of Kurikara, the Taira army retreated in panic as Minamoto claimed victory after victory. Smoke rose from the enemy camps and floated towards Kyoto, an ominous shadow of the doom approaching those inside the city. Offering thanks and prayers to the gods, Minamoto halted and made camp outside Kyoto. Siege engines pounded the walls for days, reducing its great castles to piles of rubble. As the main gate fell, samurai poured into the city, while Minamoto strode triumphantly to the imperial palace and planted his banner. With the power of the Taira broken and their capital taken, a seemingly doomed rebellion had triumphed. It would take 2 more long years, but Minamoto's prowess as a commander ensured victory at the Battle of Danoura, ending the Genpei War and ushering in the new era of the Kamakura Shogunate.
Kyoto paid dearly for Nobunaga's death, and in the end, Hideyoshi was able to accomplish what his mentor could not. By 1590, Japan was a unified country. Great though it was, this accomplishment did not satisfy Hideyoshi, who then set about on an ambitious plan to conquer China and Korea. Japan was not free of conflict, as civil wars continued to rise and fall for many years. However, the Ieyasu family, former allies of Hideyoshi, continued to rule Japan as shoguns until the 19th century.
Although vastly outnumbered by the large Han tower ships, the smaller and more maneuverable Ming vessels were better suited for the shallow water. During the second night of the battle, the Ming launched a surprise attack with fire ships, which devastated many of the Han ships. Thousands of Han soldiers drowned or burned alive. The Ming victory secured their position as the strongest faction in China. In time, they conquered the Middle Kingdom, ending a century of Mongol domination. The new dynasty ruled China for nearly 3 centuries, ushering in a great age of prosperity and stability.
The heavy Venetian galleasses broke through the Turkish lines and trampled over the smaller ships of the Turks. But there were too few of the galleasses to win the battle on their own. The Spanish and Venetians attempted to grapple and board the Turkish ships, where the superior experience and weapons of the Christian sailors could be brought to bear. As the day wore on, the Turkish juggernaut began to run out of strength. Scores of Turkish galleys were dashed on the rocks, and others sank to the bottom of the bay. Less than 50 Turkish ships survived the battle. Lepanto was not the climax of the conflict between the Christians and the Turks on the Mediterranean, but it was a turning point. The Turks had difficulty rebuilding their fleet back to its former size, while the Christians continued to update their fleets with the latest technological advancements, ensuring a decisive military advantage for further encounters on the high seas. As long as the sun was in the sky, the Byzantine army could fight the Turks back towards their camp. When dusk settled over Anatolia, however, the Turks could harass the ponderous Byzantine cavalry as it withdrew to Manzikert. When they could stand no more of this torment, the Byzantine flanks collapsed into a full rout, and the Turkish horse archers pounced for a quick kill. The Battle of Manzikert was not lost due to the poor performance of soldiers or commanders, but through Byzantine treachery. Deceit from within the armies disrupted the chain of command, as factions feuding for control of the throne in Constantinople betrayed their armies at the front. A much weakened Byzantium was then forced to call the rest of the Christian West for help, leading to the Crusades. The Byzantine Empire lingered for another 4 centuries, but in only a shadow of its former glory. The Japanese were unable to establish a base in either China or Korea. Therefore, all supplies and reinforcements had to come from the Japanese islands themselves. Once Admiral Yi destroyed the Japanese navy, the samurai armies were left isolated, and the invasion ended. Yu Shi-shin died in the battle, but the Japanese commander Hideyoshi died soon after, and with him the lust for Japanese conquest. The possibility of a Japanese empire in Eastern Asia in the 16th century died under the guns of slow but deadly armored Korean warships. The soul of the Frankish army was its knights, but Charles Martel knew that his cavalry, undisciplined, buried under the weight of weapons and armor, could not match the swiftness of the Muslim riders. Therefore, he ordered the knights to dismount and join ranks with the Frankish swordsmen to form a tight shield wall. The Muslims had always conquered with swift offensiveness and were not equipped to counter the Franks' defensive strategy. The arrows of the Muslim archers bounced harmlessly off the heavy Frankish armor, and the light Muslim cavalry could not breach the human chain. Battered and bleeding, the invaders broke ranks and fled back to the Pyrenees and the protection of Spain. From Charles Martel's Frankish kingdom eventually grew the Holy Roman Empire, making him the founding father of both Germany and France. Much of the Viking history is recorded in oral accounts called sagas, passed down through generations. 2 of the most famous sagas are reserved for the adventures of Eric the Red and his men, who crossed the mighty sea in tiny ships to forge a new Viking sovereignty. Vinland, as the New World was called, was not kind to the Vikings. Although they lacked the iron weapons of the Norsemen, the native Skraeling were fierce warriors who fought relentlessly to defend their homeland against the Norse invaders. The vastness of the North Atlantic cut the Vikings in Newfoundland off from their homeland, and they suffered many long years while trying to establish their new colony.
Favored by Odin and Thor, the Vikings watered the ground with the blood of their enemies, seizing vast amounts of plunder and fertile land. The stench of smoke and death filled the air as hapless victims foolishly turned to their altars instead of their swords. The haughty Anglo-Saxons met their match at the hands of ruthless Viking warriors eager to earn their place at Odin's table. True to their word, Ragnar's sons carved the blood eagle into the back of the cowardly Ayla as a warning to any who might think of opposing them. Ragnar's sons settled the land that they had conquered, eventually establishing a state known as the Danelaw. For the next 2 centuries, Dane and Saxon would live as neighbors, sometimes at war, sometimes in peace, until the Saxon victory over the Norse at Stamford Bridge in 1066 foiled the last Viking invasion of England.
With his son's death avenged, Don Francisco surrendered the viceroyship of India and wrote his final chapter. He would not return to his beloved Portugal. Landing in southern Africa to collect water, his party was ambushed by the Khoikhoi natives. We found his body on that forsaken white beach. In the 5 years since we departed Lisbon, we followed Don Francisco to the edge of the earth. We fought ebony-skinned warriors in the jungles and savannas of Africa, battled Mamluk sailors on the decks of galleys heaving in the monsoon waves, and struggled against armies of elephants and camels in the sprawling cities of India. Our caravels had taken us to the distant shores unknown to our ancestors, and awoken Europe to a world beyond our dreams.
I saw how Gidejan finally fell, his body covered with blood. He was wrong to kill his brother, yes, but he was the rightful heir to the throne. I tried to defend my homeland from disaster and lost my eye for it. A small price for such an honor. Now you remember this well, boy. Your deed's rise to the throne was not some glorious adventure. It was a bloody mess. The old man leaned back, sighing. Glancing at my son, I noticed that he suddenly seemed older than he had this morning. Nobody dared to whisper another word.
The first year of my freedom. The fighting is over. The fire has gone out of Richard's lust for conquest. The two respected adversaries have begun to speak, finally, of peace. War is not gentle with men's health. Richard fell ill with a fever. Because he respected his enemy, Saladin sent Richard fruit and mountain snow to comfort him. Soon enough, Richard boarded a ship headed back to England. The Third Crusade is over. The final treaty was signed on September the 2nd, 1192. By its terms, Jerusalem remains in Saracen hands, but Christian pilgrims are to be allowed to visit all the holy places, freely and safely. It seems a fitting compromise to a war that has been fought over religion and land. The war is over, but I do not think I shall ever set foot in Normandy again. I want to see the steel foundries in Damascus, and the gardens of the Caliph in Baghdad. I've never seen the mighty Crac de Chevalier, now fallen fortress of the Knights Hospitaller. The Holy Land has many wondrous sights, and I can spend a lifetime here. It is peace in the Holy Land, for the moment. Sadly, in a land so small, home to so many different cultures, the birthplace of 3 of the world's great religions, I suspect that blood may one day stain the sand again.
Peace in the Empire and the deaths of his family avenged, Mansa Sundjata settled well into his role as the ruler of Mali. In peace, he was as effective an emperor as he was in war, building markets and monuments across his lands. He was a model for all emperors to follow, making his country a center of learning and culture at the edge of the Sahara. And so I remain to tell his story. Balafaseke Kuyate is my name, his humble family historian, a griot of superb bloodline and patronage. And this is Sumanguru's balafon, which I stole before the battle at Kirina and played that day to inspire the victory of Sundjata.
With the blessing of Allah, the horn announcing our success sings a loud, shrill tone that echoes over the countryside. Upon hearing of our approach, Odo's army descended upon Bordeaux, only to be trampled beneath our hooves. Another Frankish army hastened south, but was no match for our brave seasoned warriors. A bloody battle ensued, and afterwards, the Franks lamented their defeat, saying that God alone knows the number of the slain. With the Frankish army defeated, There is little standing between our magnificent forces in eternal glory as the conquerors of Europe. For centuries, history will remember us as the courageous warriors who defeated countless kings. My journey is at an end, but our triumphant army marches north to defeat one final adversary, a man who calls himself the Hammer, Martel in the Frankish tongue, foolishly believes that he can resist us. Soon enough, his feeble army will crumble and flee, just like the rest.
Not so long ago, some 500,000 people called Tenochtitlan home. It is difficult to recall that this smoking ruin was once an endless city. Yet, we will rebuild. We created this island upon which our city and temple stand, and we can do it once more. The Aztec Empire has endured its greatest challenge, yet the Spanish may return in the future. I am not certain that there is a place for us in this new world. I could ask the gods for a hint of the future, but no doubt that would lead to more sacrifice, and I think there has been enough death for now. My people composed a poem to commemorate this great war that we have survived, and yet perhaps still not won. Broken spears lie in the roads. We have torn our hair in grief. The houses are roofless now, and their walls are red with blood. So says Cuauhtémoc, Emperor of Tenochtitlan.
The old man was silent for some time, but then addressed me. You have surely heard of the Tawantinsuyu, the realm of the four parts. That is what we call our empire, since Topayupanqui succeeded in subjugating the Chimu. The lands to the north, south, east, and west had finally been conquered, and the Inca now dominated the entire region, mountain and valley. Knowing that his son was of equal wisdom and virtue, Pachacútec could die without regret. Now, you know the entire story. The story of the Inca. I hesitated for a moment before asking the old man, "You have told me much indeed, but what was the fate of the two generals, Bicaquirao and Apomaita? Surely their story does not end there." The old man beamed at me and laughed before giving his answer. Well, Bicaquirao gave his life in battle and died the most honorable death imaginable. Apomaita was not quite as favored by fortune, however. It is said that having grown older than the hills themselves, he now lives a life of solitude in a stone hut. From time to time, you might find him telling inquisitive travelers tales of bygone times that are so fantastic that they seem almost difficult to believe.
My father did not live to see the conquest of the Rakhine. The doctor claimed the lung sickness took his life. But I know my father. No man who rode a charging elephant into throngs of Shan archers, who stormed the cities of the tide, or who ruled an empire not seen since the ancient days would die from a mere cough. No. My father left this world because he chose to. There was only one conquest left, worthy of a man like Bayinnaung. I know legends will be told of him. I know old shamans will tell prophecies. But no deed would match his final act. Greater in battle than the man who would conquer 1,000 men is he who would conquer just one, himself.
Excellence! You have mastered every lesson. Excellence! You have mastered every lesson that I had to teach. Remember the words of Sun Tzu and his teachings about the art of war, and you will win many battles. Or in the words of the wise philosopher warrior, if you know the enemy and you know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles.
At first, all went according to my plan. My army surrounded the Sunda royal family, and I ordered them to surrender their weapons. I was convinced that they would comply. To my surprise, instead of surrendering, the Sunda drew their weapons and attacked my army, even though they were vastly outnumbered. I tried in vain to stop the fighting, but the Sunda were destroyed, and my plot crumbled in dust. My own king and his family, the family that I have spent my entire life serving, were disgusted by my actions. When the king summoned me, I could see the disappointment and loathing in his eyes. In tears, he told me that his bride-to-be had committed suicide, and that I had ruined the reputation of our empire. Many in the Majapahit Empire wanted me dead, but because of my long years of service, the king spared my life. Instead, I was to resign and to withdraw to a small mansion in the countryside. Death would have been a less harsh punishment than having to live with this shame. And so, here I am, a lonely old man, once ambitious and young, now trapped in this secluded place. I realized that I was not clever like the council, but rather greedy and blind, like the animals that it misleads. The assassination of the first king, the removal of the prime minister, all of the schemes that I planned and conspired. I let nothing come in the way of my ambitions. And now, I pay the price.
Nothing stands between us and the Atlantic Ocean. The Mongol Empire comprises 2 whole continents. Europe and Asia belong to the hordes. Every place we have entered has changed forever with our passing. Russia, once filled with quarreling city-states, much like the old Mongol tribes, will forever be melded into a single gigantic empire. Genghis Khan forged the largest empire ever created in the life of one man. His body was carried back to the river Onon, where the legendary Blue Wolf and Fallow Doe once lived. He was buried in the ground, and 1,000 horsemen rode over the site to disguise it. Genghis Khan's final resting place was devoured by the steppes. My people cherish the legend that their great ruler will one day return to lead his horsemen to another bloody victory.
The Ming were defeated on the battlefield, and the last fortress fell. Le Loi and Wang Peng met for the first time and agreed to a truce. It was apparent that the two had great respect for each other. The remaining Ming soldiers, numbering more than 80,000, were now at the mercy of the Vietnamese. Le Loi was lenient, however, and spared their lives. He invited the Ming generals to a lavish banquet and allowed all of the Ming soldiers to return to China unharmed. He even provided ships to transport them and released all prisoners that were taken in the war. Le Loi knew that the Ming emperor would never give up while his honor was at stake. To make sure the emperor would not lose face and to secure the future of Vietnam, he sent lavish gifts to the emperor and offered Dai Viet as an independent tributary state of the Ming. It was a small price to pay for peace and stability. Le Loi became emperor, and his dynasty would reign over an independent Vietnam for centuries. Le Loi would forever be known as the hero of the people of Vietnam.
Prithviraj's heroism could not overcome his delay. He was defeated and taken to the Turkish warlord's castle in the Afghan mountains. There, my king was cruelly blinded and imprisoned. I followed my Raja in his captivity. When I came to the Turkish court, I regaled the warlord with the same tales and feats that I have told you. Surely I persuaded him. A generous warlord would treat such a heroic Raja as a companion and vassal, not as a prisoner condemned to a sullen dungeon. But Muhammad's heart was cruel, and though he brought my Raja from his prison, he mocked Prithviraj for his blindness. In ridicule, he threw a bow and a single arrow at my Raja's feet and dared him to strike at him. Prithviraj drew the bow. Though he could not see, the sound of the Turk's sneering laughter made his aim true. he released the arrow, striking Muhammad Ghori. The guards fell upon Prithviraj and slew him. In Ajmer, Sanyogita was stricken with grief. So strong was her love that she could not bear to live another day without her Prithviraj. In honor of her husband and defiant to the end, she took her life by throwing herself into a fire. Thus, my story ends where it began, with a legend born of fire.
Hegemony is a wonderful thing. The power and prestige of the Khmer Empire reached new levels under Suryavarmán I, and all prospered. Despite being known as a great conqueror, Suryavarmán was not simply a militaristic aggressor. His reign was marked by vast improvements in the general infrastructure of the empire, and an emphasis on religious toleration. He erected numerous palaces and temple complexes, and ruled benevolently. His legacy lives through these structures, the pride of our citizens, and the strength of the Khmer Empire. This legacy is a cause worth defending. It is this notion of greatness that you must invoke to electrify the minds of the common soldiery.
The Battle of Ankara was a catastrophe for the Ottomans. Never before had they suffered the disgrace of having the Sultan captured in battle. Turning his armies around, Tamerlane left Anatolia in chaos. It is only a matter of time before he seeks another victim. The man ended his tale on that foreboding note. I realized that I had to prepare my kingdom lest my lands appear ripe for the picking. I ordered everyone to retire to their quarters. We would discuss this new danger in the morning, with clear and ready minds. Suddenly, the doors burst open, and a servant rushed towards me. Sire, a messenger from the Waldrot called Tamerlane is here to speak to you. He claims that you are harboring someone of interest to him. I turned to the old man who had not heard the messenger, and asked for his name. His weary, dark eyes met mine, and he answered in a grim voice. I am Toktamish Khan, of the blood of Genghis Khan, and the rightful ruler of the Golden Horde. Landless and friendless, all I have left is my tale.
Each night, I have the same two visions. One of a field of wheat stalks swaying in the wind. Another of bright, burning flames, trampling horse hooves, and loud screams. My people, the Visigoths, live peacefully in the rich lands of southern Gaul. Our farms flourish, and our cattle grow in number every day. But for all our fortune, I cannot shake the ominous visions I have every night. Like Alaric, I have seen the future. The Huns are coming, and they will stop at nothing.
The city of Aquileia at the tip of the Adriatic was wiped off the face of the earth. The fugitives from that pitiful city took refuge among the islands, marshes and lagoons at the head of the Adriatic Sea, and there founded the town of Venetia, or Venice. But what of the Pope? I asked. No one knows what Saint Leo said to the Hunnic king, but that very day, Attila turned his army around and started back for the Hun lands on the Danube. Attila the Hun died shortly thereafter. Since he had failed to claim Rome, he could not have Honoria, and instead brought another wife into his harem. On his wedding night, Attila suffered a nosebleed and choked to death. For a man who had boasted that, where my horse has trodden, no grass grows, it was a curiously anticlimactic death. The Hunnic warriors cut their hair and gashed their faces, so that the king should be lamented not by tears of maidens, but by the blood of warriors. Attila's bloody reign of conquest lasted 19 long years. Father Armand was silent for a long time. He glanced over at the head on a stake. A Hunnic trophy, he said. I think the man was a Visigoth. He died at the Battle of the Catalonian Fields. I keep it here so that I may see it every day and remember. Remember what, Father? I asked him. The scent of a burning village, the sound of butchery, the way peasants would flee before the Hun riders, the way we would ride them down, the way it felt to conquer alongside Attila and the Huns. He leaned so close I could feel his breath. Sometimes, I miss it.
There is a legend concerning every great king, from Arthur on through Barbarossa, that says the king will return someday, when his country needs him. Myths and legends about the sleeping emperor were passed down in German folktales. The Holy Roman Empire did not endure. She fell back into a patchwork of tiny city-states. Some would say Barbarossa's rule was a failure, but is it not a greater testament to the man that it was the force of his will alone that held the empire together? And what of Henry the Lion? With Barbarossa gone, there was nothing stopping him from returning to the Holy Roman Empire. But I am an old man now. What harm could I possibly do?
The morning sun shone on the shores of the Aegean. I was speaking to a miller when I heard shouts from the harbor. Racing to the docks, I recognized several Barians disembarking from a battered vessel. The tidings were grim. Bari was in Norman hands, and my father had fallen valiantly along with it. I thought of his parting words, but I doubt that I will ever don his armaments again. Like my ancestor Panos, I have seen enough battle for 10 lifetimes. I think I shall travel the Empire, from Thessaly to Anatolia, seeking work as I go. With all luck, I will earn enough wealth to buy a house in the countryside, and raise miles of vineyards on the hillside. Perhaps one day, when I recount the tale of my family to my children and grandchildren, I will be able to conclude it with how we have found peace at last.
It was the twilight of Moorish Spain. The Berber army had been broken, and Valencia withstood the siege. King Alfonso would not allow us to bury the Cid until he could personally attend the funeral. When he arrived, he dispelled all thoughts of interring the Cid into the earth. Instead, the Cid's body was preserved and placed near the altar of the church, seated on an ivory stool that he had captured from the Moors, clothed in precious silk, and holding his sword, Tizon, in his left hand. And who was left to rule in Valencia? King Alfonso of Castile or Count Berenguer of Barcelona? No. Valencia is mine. It is I, Jimena Diez, who claims rulership of my dead husband's kingdom. And if the Berbers return to Valencia, it is I whom they shall find commanding the soldiers of Rodrigo Diez, el Cid Campeador.
The one-eyed Khan ordered a feast for Ivailo and Ivan Asen, where he listened to their arguments on why he should support one over the other. Then, having heard enough, Nogai rose and pointed to Ivailo. In that moment, it is said that Nogai's guards seized Ivailo and murdered him. The body was taken away as Nogai returned to his seat and finished his meal. But I am not so sure that was the end of our hero. In the years since, Ivailo has appeared again in many places and many times. Wherever the downtrodden have the courage to fight for freedom and justice, Ivailo seems to appear. He lives in all of us, and especially in you, my child. I can see you're confused. I know you're thinking, what does this pig-herding Tsar have to do with me? Don't you see, my dear? I lived in Bulgaria then. So did you, in fact. You were very young then. A mere baby when I wrapped you in your swaddling clothes and carried you here. It was on the day when the Emperor, my uncle, took us from Turnovo and from your father, Tsar Ivailo.
A century of English toil, blood, and victories was reversed in a little over a year by a teenage girl. The 100 years of war has ended. Even more importantly, Joan's acts ignited a sense of French nationalism. Peasants and nobles alike no longer belong to lords and kings, but to France herself. We will not let Joan be forgotten. Already, statues and stained glass portraits have been commissioned in hundreds of towns and cities throughout France. Her verdict of guilt was rightfully reversed, and I expect that Joan of Arc will soon be beatified as a saint. Sometimes the outcome of history is determined by strength of arms, other times by happenstance. But in 15th century France, history was determined by the will of a young girl, the only person in history to command the armies of an entire nation at the age of 17.
It has been years since I last saw the lands of my ancestors. Although I still often find myself awash in fond memories of my younger years on the Eurasian steppes, I do not grieve, for it is fate that has led us here. Our people have spread out to all corners of the world, leaving a strong mark on it. In Hungary, the daughter of Koten married the eldest son of King Bela, and many of our people live there in peace now. The Cumans, who were enslaved and sold by the Mongols years ago, have carved out a new empire in the Middle East. I even heard that these Mamluks, as they are now called, have defeated the Mongol army invading Syria, halting their relentless expansion once and for all. Much blood has been spilled, but I can see a bright future for the people of former Cumania. One where we, like our ancestors before us, will keep on shaping the records of history. Hunger and disease spread in the besieged city. The soldiers left the walls and turned their weapons inward to the cloistered professors and lawyers who had promised them liberty, but at a great cost. Is it better to be feared or loved? In that moment, Sforza was both. Milan opened her gates, and Sforza lavished the people with all of the grain, their own grain, that he had taken during the siege. The grateful, if foolish, people crowned Sforza, that treacherous, conniving, selfish bastard, Duke of Milan. It was not his final triumph, but it was his grandest. That is the story of Sforza, from one who fought with him and against him. Do I wish ill upon him? No more than I would wish ill on the fox who raids the henhouse in the black of night. It does only what a fox does and cannot be blamed for it. I do not blame Sforza any more than I would blame myself. After all, Sforza's blood is in me, for I am his cousin, Micheletto. Sforza is like me. We are condottieri. We are the contract men of Italy.
Dracula achieved victory at last, and the invaders fled before him. Rallying his men, he charged the enemy ranks with an unspeakable vengeance that emboldened his army. A decisive victory was near, but it was at that hour a volley of arrows whistled through the air and struck Dracula in the chest, knocking him from his horse. The Turks easily routed our leaderless forces, and had a chance to drive them out and vanish. The occupation resumed, and the survivors despaired. The memory of a great man endures forever. As a token of gratitude, I invited our host to join us in a pilgrimage to the monastery at Snagaf to pay our respects to Dracula's grave. Tears running down his face, the elderly man could do naught but nod in reply.
It looked certain that we would be defeated at Falkirk. Yet somehow, though outnumbered and outranged by English longbows, we were victorious. The English castle was torn down, and a Scottish one shall be built in its place. William Wallace has shown us the path to victory. Although he is but one man, he inspires great deeds in others. Many of the Scottish knights and lords have drawn their swords with his. Wallace's own sword is a 5.5-foot beast, forged of course in Scotland. He has sworn not to rest until his sword finds the neck of Edward Longshanks. The struggle will continue, but we have learned the ways of war. Now, it is the English who fear.